Anomalous trajectories, Admiral, Ensign Killen said, his voice tight with the anxiety of speaking out of turn. He stood ramrod straight on the polished bridge of the indomitable will, his three-fingered hand indicating a cluster of objects on the main holoscreen. Sub-etheric sensors are flagging them again. Inert, cold mass signatures in the outer asteroid belt. Dozens of them. Their vectors, while slow, seem unusually coincidental with our projected staging area. Admiral Vezox turned his head slowly, fixing the junior officer with a look of amused pity. He let the silence hang for a moment, turning the ensign's concern into a teachable moment for the rest of the command staff. He gestured magnanimously at the display, a smooth, resonant baritone filling the bridge. "Ensign, do you know the human joke about throwing rocks?" Vezox said, a faint smile playing on his thin lips. Kylar stood frozen, unsure if he was supposed to answer. Vezox didn't wait for one. "It's a fable where a primitive species triumphs over an advanced one through sheer, brute force kinetics. They find it charming, a validation of their entire cultural ethos. We find it charmingly idiotic." Polite, appreciative laughter rippled through the assembled officers. They were the finest of the Vark Dominion. Their uniforms crisp, their posture perfect. They were instruments of a celestial empire that had not known a peer in 1,000 years. "They are a species that glorifies desperation," Vezox declared, his voice swelling with paternal certainty. The rust-colored marble of Calliope hung in the blackness, surrounded by the holographic icons of his 9th Annihilation Fleet. 212 ships, the pinnacle of Vark engineering and martial pride. Their history is a litany of last stands and suicidal charges, framed as heroic rather than what they truly are, tactical incompetence. Their last communique was a plea for sanctions to be lifted, a cry for mercy from the galaxy's ash bin. He waved a dismissive hand at the blinking anomalies Killen had indicated. "Coincidental to what, Ensign? To the immutable laws of gravity, it's a rock. They are throwing rocks at us from months away, hoping one might scratch our paint. How pathetic." The ensign's face flushed. "Yes, Admiral." "Focus on primary fleet positioning," Vezox commanded, his gaze sweeping across his perfect, orderly fleet. His command ship, the Indomitable Will, would remain here, 5 million clicks behind the main force, a supreme commander observing the art of war from a position of absolute safety and control. He would watch as his destroyers formed the screen, his cruisers the hammer, and his battleships the anvil. It would be a flawless execution of the Varkorlan doctrine, a battle so one-sided it would be studied for its efficiency for generations. "Advance and cleanse this system. I want this finished by the time I take my morning meal." "They think we're gonna fight their fleet." Colonel Hector Grant's voice was a low grind, a functional tool for delivering unpleasant facts that had none of Vezox's polished resonance. He stood on a grated platform in the center of what was once an ore-processing facility. The air smelled of sweat and stale caffeine. Below him, the assembled leaders of the Calliope Defense Force, court-martialed captains, disgraced intelligence agents, and infantry NCOs, with more kills than commendations, watched him with hard, patient eyes. A massive jury-rigged projector flickered, casting the image of the Vark 9th Annihilation Fleet onto a stained concrete wall. Grant tapped a control panel, and 30 of the 212 icons glowed a sickly red. They weren't the frontline ships, they were the flagships, The command cruisers, the logistics hubs, the communications relays, the brain and the nervous system. They're wrong, Grant continued, his tone flat. Fighting their fleet is what they want. It's what they understand. We're not gonna give it to them. He gestured to the red icons. This is Operation Nightfall. The objective is strategic decapitation. In 7 hours, when their command cycle resets and they settle into their staging orbits, we go in. We neutralize these 30 targets. I want their command crews dead or disabled. I want their primary reactors either inert or set for catastrophic overload. I want their comm systems either seized or shattered. He paused, letting the scale of the suicidal mission sink in. No one flinched. These weren't fresh-faced cadets. They were the dregs, the cast-offs, the men and women EarthGov had deemed too broken or too dangerous for civilized warfare. The Vark are a top-down military. They value order above all else. We are gonna give them chaos, systematic, shock, and paralysis. We will turn their 200-ship fleet into 200 blind, deaf, and panicked mobs. The op runs on a synchronized clock. No comms, no check-ins. You have your targets. You have your timetables. You succeed or you die quietly. Grant looked out at the faces staring up at him. He knew their files, their failures, their ghosts. He'd been sent here to preside over their slow decay. Instead, he'd given them a purpose. He shut down the projector. The cavern plunged back into its usual dim industrial gloom. The Vark won a battle, he said, his voice dropping to its usual wary rumble. We're gonna give them an autopsy. Get to it. Weeks earlier, Grant had stood in the main control room of Mining Operation Gamma, watching the very same asteroid belt Vezox had so casually dismissed. He wasn't looking at it with the eyes of an admiral, but the obsessive focus of a demolition expert planning a complex implosion. He'd spent a decade studying the gravitational eddies and chaotic drift of the Calliope belt. He knew its rhythms better than he knew the faces of his own long-dead family. On his order, the massive electromagnetic ore catapults, listed in the official EarthGov manifest as decommissioned due to seismic instability, had fired. Not with payloads of iron and nickel, but with hollowed-out asteroids, their cores replaced with Spartan, life-support-equipped compartments. They were launched cold, without drive plumes or energy signatures, their trajectories calculated to settle them into a dormant, stable cluster. They became just more debris in a field of debris, perfectly positioned in the exact path a conventional, honor-bound fleet would use for its primary staging area. He called them the Stone Coffins. Now in the repurposed armory, Sergeant Aria Graves Monroe moved with a fluidity that was utterly silent. She was a ghost long before the mission started, presumed KIA after a black op on Heracles went so sideways it fell off the map. Only Grant knew the truth. She ran a gloved hand over the sleek, custom-fabricated gas canisters, each one filled with a hyper-efficient neuroparalytic. They were tools, and she was an artist of silent suffocation. Across the bay, Specialist Sketch was practically vibrating. His hands, stained with grease and soldering flux, moved in a blur over a complex device made from a mining drill's magnetic resonator, a ship's targeting computer, and what looked suspiciously like the heating element from a mess hall coffee machine. "Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it?" he said, not to anyone in particular. His words tumbled out in a rapid-fire cascade of jargon and manic energy. The Vark use a harmonic cascade to regulate their primary power distribution. It's elegant, centralized, and stupidly, catastrophically rigid. One big, perfectly timed orchestra. We're going to be the one guy in the back with a cowbell, hitting it at just the wrong time, over and over again. He grinned, a frantic, sleep-deprived expression. We introduce a counter-frequency, a sour note, and the whole system will tear itself apart trying to self-correct. Full Agincourt on their CNC, Colonel. We're going to shoot the knights off their high horses with longbows made of bad math. ETA 5 miles to systems check. Grant just nodded. He never told Sketch what to do, only what he needed broken. The rest was just noise and genius. Admiral Vezox awoke in his palatial quarters to silence. He had expected the crisp chime of his aide, a report of the human colony's swift and utter capitulation already prepared for his review. There was nothing. Annoyance, the first discordant note in his symphony of command, pricked at him. He strode onto the bridge of the indomitable will. The night shift crew looked tense. The main holoscreen, which should have been a sea of placid green icons, was a mess of blinking red and amber. "Report," Vezox snapped, his voice losing some of its resonant charm. His second in command, a grizzled veteran named Gore, turned from the display. His face was pale. "Admiral, we have a problem." "I can see that, Gore. Explain it." "The fleet is unresponsive." Vezox stared at him. "Unresponsive? All of it?" "No, Admiral. That is the problem. The main body of the fleet is broadcasting, but they are in chaos. We have lost contact with the entire command echelon." Gore pointed a trembling finger at the display. "Flagship Fist of Var, gone. Command Cruiser Vigilance, gone. Logistics Hub Providentia, gone. All 30 primary and secondary command vessels. Sir." Vezox stepped closer to the holographic tank, his arrogance beginning to evaporate like mist in a sudden frost. The icons for his most powerful ships, his most trusted commanders, were blinking red. Then, as he watched, the icon for the battleship Righteous Blade winked out, vanishing from the network as if it had never existed. "No distress signals," Vezox whispered, the knot in his stomach tightening. "No weapons fire. No energy bloom from a reactor breach." "Nothing, sir," Gore said, his voice barely audible. "Just silence. One moment they were there, and the next they were gone. The rest of the fleet is blind. Conflicting reports, panicked transmissions. 2 destroyer squadrons are accusing each other of treason. They're firing on each other in Sector Gamma." Vezox looked at the display, at the silent, gaping holes where his command structure used to be. The laughter of the previous day echoed in his mind, a mocking, hollow sound. Alien generals laughed at human strategy, until their fleet vanished overnight. The fleet's head had vanished, and now the body was beginning to tear itself apart. The night before, while Vezox slept soundly, 24 small black-skinned shuttles had detached from the far side of Calliope. They were stripped-down prospector ships, their engines baffled, their hulls coated in radar-absorbent paint that Grant's team had cooked up from the fermented mine sludge and powdered ferrite. They moved with the silent patience of predators, flying on precise, pre-calculated burns that left almost no thermal signature. They didn't approach the Vark fleet directly. They headed for the asteroid belt for the cluster of dormant, hollowed-out rocks Grant had placed there weeks ago. Inside one of the shuttles, Graves and her team, Sabotage Team Alpha, worked in the dim red light of their combat gear. The mood was calm, professional. They were ghosts already, so space held no special terror for them. They docked with their assigned stone coffin, a jagged chunk of iron-rich rock designated Sarcophagus 8. The transfer was swift. The shuttle backed away, and the human team was left alone inside a cold, dark rock, drifting on a long, slow, unpowered trajectory toward the Vark command cruiser, Vigilance. Their coffin had no engine, no electronics, no energy signature. To the Vark fleet's advanced sensors, it was just another piece of celestial debris, one of thousands in the belt. It was a Trojan horse made of stone, aimed at the heart of an empire that had forgotten how to look for threats that didn't burn hot and bright. A single tiny puff from a cold gas thruster, no more powerful than a breath, adjusted their final trajectory. And then they waited, suspended in the silent, patient dark. The hull of the Vigilance groaned as the magnetic grapples of Sarcophagus 8 bit into a service crawl space near the aft spine of the ship. The impact was negligible, lost in the standard vibrations of a mile-long warship. Inside, Graves' team cut through the hull with a thermal lance, so precise it barely heated the surrounding metal. They moved like wraiths into the maintenance ducts, their padded boots making no sound on the grated floors. The ship was a city, and there were rats in its walls, unseen, unheard. The Vark were tall, slender beings, but their ship design had a fatal flaw born of arrogance. Their service corridors were built to accommodate bulky repair drones, making them more than wide enough for a human in light combat gear. Graves led her team through the labyrinthine network. Following a schematic pieced together from long-range scans and a healthy dose of educated guesswork, she found their objective, the primary atmospheric processing and circulation hub, a cathedral of pipes, filters, and humming machinery that was the ship's lungs. The air here was clean, sterile, recycled with perfect Vark efficiency. Graves pulled one of the custom canisters from her pack. It was sleek and black, with a simple red trigger. Her second-in-command, a grim-faced man named Calloway, placed a small bypass device on the primary sensor node, looping the system's diagnostic feed. To the bridge, the air would remain perfect, pure, safe. Graves knelt by the central intake valve. She attached the canister's nozzle, secured it with a magnetic clamp, and looked at Calloway. No words were needed. She thought of a line from an ancient play Grant had once made her read. A story of a prince who talked too much, and a kingdom that fell. To sleep, perchance to dream, she whispered, her voice a ghost in the hum of the machinery. She pressed the trigger. The canister hissed, but the gas itself made no sound. The perfect Vark filters didn't detect it. The perfectly recycled Vark air didn't change its taste or smell. It was the plague of a ghost, and it spread with the speed of breath. A colorless, odorless, fast-acting neuroparalytic. It would take less than 5 minutes to permeate every corner of the ship, from the bridge to the engine room, the barracks to the mess hall. It didn't kill. It simply switched the crew off, leaving them frozen in place, their minds trapped in silent, conscious paralysis. It was a fate, Graves thought, far crueler and more efficient than death. Her job was to make living statues, tombs, with a heartbeat. Deep in the engineering section of the Vark flagship, the mighty fist of Var, Sketch was having the time of his life. He and his team, squeezed into a power conduit barely wide enough for his shoulders, had bypassed 3 security checkpoints using nothing more than a focused EMP pulse and a well-timed data shunt. "Okay, kiddies, look at this beauty," Sketch whispered into his throat mic, his eyes wide with manic glee as he peered through a service grate. Below them lay the reactor control interface, a glowing latticed structure pulsing with controlled power. It's a harmonic cascade regulator. Pure energy art. The Vark use a standing wave to manage power flow. It's beautiful, and it has the flexibility of a frozen crowbar. His team, two hardened combat engineers named Burrow and Myler, were setting up their jury-rigged device. It was the magnetic resonator from an industrial mining drill, cabled to a capacitor bank ripped from a planetary surveyor. If we introduce a counter-frequency, a dissonant signal, using our little rock chewer here, Sketch continued. His hands darted, plugging the final wires into place. The regulator's AI will try to compensate, but the signal is designed to be chaotic, to change its properties based on the system's own feedback. The regulator will boost powers and cut it, shunting plasma through conduits that can't handle the load. It will tear itself apart trying to find a harmony that doesn't exist anymore. He paused, patting his pockets. Right. Bypass insulator. The feedback from the resonator will fry our own gear unless we can wedge the primary conduit open with something non-conductive, pliable, and readily available. He pulled a foil-wrapped stick from his vest. Gum! Gum'll work. He unwrapped a stick of mint-flavored gum, chewed it furiously for 10 seconds, then expertly wedged the sticky, insulated mass into a critical junction of the vault control panel. Burrow and Myler just stared at him, their expressions a mixture of horror and awe. What? Sketch hissed. It's a polymer. It's perfect. They'll never see it coming. He activated the device. A low hum filled the conduit. Below them, the steady, rhythmic pulse of the Vark reactor began to flutter. A single, pure note of power, now infected with a discordant, screeching harmony. The heart of the flagship had just developed a fatal arrhythmia, induced by a piece of cheap confectionery. What do you mean, fake orders? Vezox's voice was a raw, strangled thing. The regal admiral was gone, replaced by a terrified creature cornered in his own command center. So, we're intercepting transmissions on command-level encryptions, Ensign Kylan reported, his face ashen. He'd been right about the rocks, and the knowledge brought him no comfort, only terror. They're perfect replications of our command procedures. One squadron was just ordered to reroute their power to inertial dampeners, citing a non-existent gravimetric shear. They're sitting ducks. Another group of frigates was just given coordinates for a rendezvous that sends them on a direct collision course with each other. Then broadcast a fleet-wide override. Gore, his second-in-command, urged, his voice strained. On your authority, Admiral, order them to cease fire and hold position. With what codes, you fool? Vezox rounded on him, his eyes wild with paranoia. The humans have the network. They have our flagships. Any fleet-wide order I give now could be a trap. They could alter it, turn it into a self-destruct command for all I know. They want me to broadcast, just so they can get a precise lock on our location. No, we stay silent. We watch. The holoscreen was a nightmare of motion. His fleet, his perfect, disciplined fleet, was eating itself alive. Ships were firing on friendlies, shutting down vital systems, or veering off on insane trajectories. It was a body without a head, convulsing in its death throes. Before the command ships had gone dark, a few garbled, panicked whispers had made it through the static. In the walls! There are ghosts in the walls! Security feed is looping. It's the same 10 seconds over. And not Valk. They don't move like, oh gods, they're on the... The transmission had cut out, replaced by the deafening silence that had started it all. Now that silence had been replaced by the screams of his own men, following the orders of ghosts. He was the commander of the most powerful fleet in the sector, and he was utterly, completely helpless. In the heart of Calliope, Colonel Hector Grant stood over a table. It wasn't a holographic tank, but a massive physical map of the Vox fleet's staging area. The ships were represented by magnetic markers, their positions updated not by live data feeds, but by runners carrying slips of paper. The entire operation was being run off a meticulously crafted, multi-layered timetable. The only live data came from a single hacked VOC public network feed, displayed on a monitor in the corner. It was the same feed Vezox was watching, showing the status of his fleet. Every few minutes another icon representing one of Grant's 30 targets would blink from green to red, then disappear. The command center was a tomb of tension. The only sounds were the soft scrape of the magnetic markers on the map, the quiet footsteps of the runners, and the steady rhythmic clicks of the master chronometer on the wall, counting down the seconds of the operation. A runner, a young woman with a tense set to her jaw, approached the table and handed Grant a folded note. He took it, unfolded it, and read the terse message. Sarcophagus 11 compromised. Sensor ping. Destroyed by VARC patrol. Confirmed. Patrol screen diverted to Sector Delta, away from primary approach vectors. Contingency successful. Grant simply nodded, crumbling the note in his fist. He had planned for failures. He had weaponized them. The loss of one team had been the key that unlocked the door for 29 others. The silence in the room was not the absence of sound. It was the sound of a perfectly laid plan, with all its bloody contingencies unfolding in the dark. There were no live comms to his teams. He had given them their orders, and now he could do nothing but trust. It was a complete, terrifying, and absolute act of faith in his people, and in the ruthless mathematics of his plan. The breach was explosive and swift. The assault team, call sign Reaper, blew the maglock doors to the bridge of the VOC destroyer Iron Gaze. They flowed into the room in a swift, lethal dance. There was no shouting, just the percussive, deafening roar of their 12-gauge shotguns and the short, controlled bursts of their projectile rifles. The VOC bridge crew, trained for naval combat at 1,000 kilometers, had no answer for a dozen pissed-off humans filling their command center with buckshot and fury. They were tall, elegant targets, and they went down in a spray of purple blood and shattered control panels. The fight was over in 4 seconds. "Bridge secure!" The team leader, a barrel-chested man named Diaz, barked. "Comms! Status!" "Intact, boss. They tried to wipe it, but we were too fast." "Good! Patch it in. Start broadcast sequence Gamma 9. Target the 3rd Cruiser Squadron. Let's get 'em spinning." The team's communications specialist plugged a datapad into the VARC console and began uploading false orders Grant's psychological warfare unit had scripted. While he worked, another soldier, a kid barely out of his teens with Joker scrawled on his helmet, leaned against the captain's command chair. He pulled a compressed nutrient bar from his pouch, took a large bite, and looked directly into the main bridge security camera. He gave it a slow, deliberate wink, chewed thoughtfully, and then followed his teams out. Miles away on the VARC logistics hub Providencia, a bored security officer monitored a bank of 100 screens. He saw the feed from the Iron Gaze flicker, then stabilize. An empty, silent bridge. He logged it as comms interference resolved, and turned his attention to a report on misaligned cargo containers. He never noticed that the feed was now a perfect 10-second loop. The wink, the snack, the casual act of conquest had happened in a digital ghost world of the VARC's own making. Panic was a corrosive acid, and it had eaten through Admiral Vezok's last reserve of composure. He needed to see. He needed to understand. "Launch a stealth drone," he ordered, his voice thin and ready. "I want a visual on the nearest dark ship, the Righteous Blade. Close-range flyby, full census sweep. I want to know what happened to my battleship." The drone, a sliver of black metal, detached from the indomitable will and accelerated toward the silent, drifting hulk of the VARC battleship. It arrived minutes later, its sensors finding nothing, no power, no life signs, no structural damage. The ship was intact, a perfect, pristine tomb adrift in the blackness. "Bring the visual online," Vezox commanded. The main screen on the bridge flickered to life, showing the drone's view. It swept along the massive flank of the Righteous Blade, past silent weapon emplacements and dark sensor arrays. It rounded the command tower and hovered before the vast, transparent armor view screen of the bridge. "Move closer," Vezox whispered. "Peer inside." The drone's camera zoomed in, its low light filters activating. The image resolved. The bridge was dark, lit only by the faint, distant starlight. But it wasn't empty. The entire Vark bridge crew was there, still at their stations. The captain was in his chair, the helmsman at his console, the tactical officers at theirs. They were frozen, silent. But there was one horrifying detail. Every single one of them, from the captain to the lowest-ranking ensign, had been turned in their chairs, their lifeless eyes wide with a final, frozen moment of shock, were all staring directly forward. They were all facing the view screen, as if the entire dead bridge crew had been posed, waiting patiently to watch the drone arrive, as if they were an audience for a horror show, and Vezox was the star. A proximity alarm flashed on the drone's feed. A small metallic object was detaching from the Righteous Blade's hull. "What is that?" Gore gasped. It was a canister, one of Graves' canisters. Its job's done, now magnetically released and tumbling toward the drone. The feed dissolved into a blur static, and then went black. Dawn broke over Calliope, painting the rust-colored dust in shades of orange and pink. The stealth shuttles had returned, docking silently in the hidden cavern bays. The soldiers who filed out were not cheering victors. They were exhausted, grime-steered professionals, moving with the heavy-limbed gait of those who had spent a long night doing dirty work. They were immediately put to work, stripping salvaged Vark technology from their captured equipment and handing over data chips. There was no rest. The war wasn't over. In his Spartan office, Grant listened to Graves' report. She stood before his desk, her armor still bearing the chill of space. She was as still and silent as the victim she'd left behind on the Vigilance. "Operation Nightfall is complete," she said, her voice a low monotone. "All primary targets neutralized. Sabotage teams are reporting an 88% success rate on secondary objectives. We have control of 6 Vark light cruisers and the encrypted comms networks." Grant looked up from the report he was reading. His face was a mask of pure fatigue, etched with deep lines of stress. "Casualties: 19. 4 from Reaper team during the breach of the Iron Gaze. The rest from reactor containment failures on Sketch's targets. Acceptable losses." She paused. "On the Psychop directive?" Grant looked up. "The Righteous Blade?" "Executed," she confirmed. "Per your secondary directive, we made an example of the battleship. The crew was arranged for optimal drone reception." Grant nodded slowly. He looked at Graves, his eyes holding a shared history of violence and regret. "This wasn't like Heracles, Graves." A flick of something, memory, pain, understanding passed through her eyes. So fast it might have been imagined. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "No, sir," she said, her voice hard as durasteel. "No witnesses." Admiral Vezox was alone on his bridge, having ordered everyone out. The frantic shouting had been replaced by a silence more profound and terrifying than the one that had started this nightmare. He understood now. It was all horribly, sickeningly clear. They hadn't fought his fleet. They hadn't engaged his ships. They had infected him. The rocks, the pathetic, laughable rocks he had dismissed. They were never meant to be weapons. They were delivery systems, hollowed-out coffins that had drifted silently into the heart of his fleet, attaching themselves like parasites. From those rocks, ghosts had emerged, slipping through the walls of his most secure ships. They didn't use powerful energy weapons. They used gas. They didn't use torpedoes. They used bad math and chewing gum. They didn't fight his army. They turned it into a madhouse and made the inmates slaughter each other. It was an insane strategy. It was dishonorable. It was cowardly. and it was absolutely undeniably perfect. He, Admiral Vezox of the 9th Annihilation Fleet, had not been defeated in a glorious battle. His fleet had been dismantled, piece by piece, from the inside out. He had been neutralized not by a navy, but by vermin. Vermin, with a plan that was as brilliant as it was barbaric. His console chimed, a Priority 1 message from VOC High Command. They were demanding a full report. How had he lost communication with his entire command structure? What was the status of the invasion? He had to report this. He had to explain that his ships were not destroyed but haunted, that his fleet was not beaten but broken, that the primitives he had mocked had performed a feat of strategic maneuvers so profound it had broken the spine of his entire operation without firing a single naval cannon. A sound started in his chest, a low guttural rumble. It climbed his throat and burst from his lips, not as a scream of rage, but as a laugh. It was a high, unhinged, cackling sound that echoed through the silent, opulent bridge. It was the laugh of a man who had stared into the face of a new kind of warfare, a new kind of enemy, and had found his own rigid, honorable worldview shattered into a million pieces. The sound chilled the guards outside his door to the bone, the laughter of a mind that had been utterly, completely and irrevocably broken. Grant sat at a terminal. His fingers tapped a rapid rhythm across the keys. He was crafting a weapon. For hours he compiled footage from the helmet cams of every operative. Thousands of hours of raw, brutal data. He chose the quiet, unnerving moments. The silent, ghostly transit of Graves' team through the ventilation shafts of the Vigilance. Sketch muttering to himself as he used a piece of gum to start a reactor meltdown. The casual, terrifying professionalism of Diaz's team clearing a bridge. He included the shot of Joker winking at the camera while eating his nutrient bar, the ultimate act of contemptuous defiance. He wove in the panicked, garbled transmissions from the VAR crews. Ghosts in the walls! Then he did something truly cruel. He sliced in the recording from Vezox's own bridge from the day before. The clear, resonant voice of the Admiral, mocking human desperation. The polite laughter of his doomed command staff. He laid Vezox's arrogant pronouncements over images of VOC ships firing on each other in a blind panic. He let the footage run. A collage of low-tech grit, silent horror, and brutal efficiency. He added no music, no narration. The only sounds were the breathing of his soldiers, the crack of their weapons, and the screams of the dying. At the very end, as the screen faded to black, a simple line of text appeared, stark white against the blackness. "We are humanity, and we're always listening." Grant saved the file. He routed it through the captured VAR comms relays and broadcast the entire package on every open civilian and military network in the sector. The entire package was a horror film, a promise, a warning. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the VARC Dominion. In their brightly lit high command chamber on the VARC homeworld, the Council of Admirals watched Grant's video in stunned, horrified silence. The laughter of their esteemed colleague Vezox now sounded like the prelude to a massacre. An emergency order unprecedented in the Empire's history was flashed to every fleet commander across their territory. Stand down. Cease all offensive operations. Initiate immediate top-to-bottom internal security sweeps. Vet all personnel. Scan all cargo. Treat every shadow and every flicker of the lights as a potential intrusion. The invasion of human space evaporated. The VARC war machine, the most powerful military force in the known galaxy, was paralyzed by a single terrifying thought. The ghosts might already be on their ships too. On Calliope, the news reports filtered in on a neutral trade network. They spoke of the VARC fleet's mysterious and panicked retreat. They showed clips of Grant's video, which had already gone viral, spreading terror and a grudging new respect through the galactic community. Pundits and military analysts, once dismissive of humanity's chances, now spoke in hushed tones. They had a new name for the species they had written off. They called them the boogeymen of the void. Colonel Hector Grant watched the report from his office, the glow of the screen reflecting in his tired eyes. He took a slow sip of cheap contraband whiskey from a chipped ceramic mug. The war wasn't over. He knew that. The Vark were proud. They would be back, eventually. But they would come back different. They would come back scared. For the first time in a decade, a faint, grimly satisfied smile touched his lips. Humanity was no longer the underdog, the desperate prey waiting for the slaughter. They were the thing that goes bump in the night, and they were just getting started.